Welcome to Wellness as a Way of Life, the podcast for female leaders seeking sustainable energy, clarity, and confidence. I'm Megan Swan, your guide on a journey to mastering wellness as an integrated part of your life. Let's explore personalized wellness strategies that truly resonate with who you are. Welcome to another episode of Wellness as a Way of Life. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, a true pioneer in the world of financial feminism. Janine Rogan is the founder and CEO of a wealth academy dedicated to transforming women's relationship with money. As a CPA with over a decade of experience in personal finance and corporate tax, Janine has made it her mission to close the wealth gap through education and empowerment. Her best-selling book, which I'm obsessed, The Pink Tax, was released in spring of 23, exposes the hidden costs of being a woman in today's economy, and provides actionable strategies for financial liberation. This groundbreaking work has established her as one of the leading voices in financial feminism, a movement focused on addressing the unique financial challenges women face and creating pathways to economic equality. When she's not electrifying audiences as a keynote and TEDx speaker, Janine shares her expertise through appearances on BNN, CTV, and the Globe and Mail. Her insights have helped thousands of women worldwide take control of their financial futures. Today, we'll be diving deep into the principles of financial feminism, exploring how systematic barriers affect women's wealth accumulation, and discovering practical strategies for financial empowerment. Please join me in welcoming the award-winning CPA and best-selling author and financial feminism expert, Janine Rogan. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. What an introduction.
Well, I'm really obsessed with this book. I'm like reading it and rereading it. And I'm like, first out, just shout out to some of the quotes, the powerful quotes that you have in bold on pages. I think that really sets the tone. Where to start? I think, do you want to give us your definition of financial feminism? And do you use that word a lot, or you've been sort of assigned it?
Yeah. So to me, financial feminism is just financial equality for all. And I would say, unfortunately, maybe the kind of more recent political events have not that I shy away from using it, but I think to be like marketable and saleable, there has been a shift away from DE&I in the past kind of year. And so it has become a little bit more challenging to have some of those conversations with certain groups of people.
Well, without getting too much into that, because it's a deep route.
We could be doing that for a long, long time.
I'd love to know. Yeah, I mean, let's hit it straight on. So the idea that more capital in the hands of women, or generational wealth improvement for women, how is that fighting the patriarchy?
Yeah, I think we have to kind of look back at history to understand the impacts of our financial system on women. So it really wasn't until the 60s that women could have their own bank accounts. And like that was my mom's generation. Like my mom was alive during that period. And it wasn't until the 70s that women could have their own mortgage without co-signing with a male. So either their father or their significant other. And so we've really only had kind of that one generation of women that have been able to kind of lead and show financial independence and be that example for the next generation. And so ultimately, financial independence gives you choice and power, which is kind of ultimately what I think we're all hoping for is, the freedom and choice to leave a job that you hate, or that partner that maybe, it isn't working out with. That choice to take a year sabbatical, or to retire early, or to stop working entirely and volunteer for causes you care about. Those are the types of things that financial independence and ultimately just financial independence gives women, and it allows them to make their own choices. And I think that's really empowering. But for a long time, we couldn't. We were tied down by a system that ultimately made us, have another person to co-sign or to allow us to do those things. So I think ultimately financial independence means that choice to live kind of our life on our own terms.
Yeah. And I love how you dive into the history in the book, and also the conditioning, right? So we have this structural barrier that has, to some degree or mostly, depending on the country, et cetera, been liberated, where there's a lot more choice and potential leverage that women have. At the same time, it's how we talk to our daughters. It's like the education system. I love how tangible a lot of your advice is, in that, I'm 40, going to be 46 next week. And
Happy birthday.
thank you. And I would consider myself like quite high on the spectrum in terms of education in this area. And at the same time, there were some really basic terms that you were painting out for people in your book that I think are so helpful. Like, one for me was, exactly the percentage breakdown of how your credit score is calculated. I've never seen that anywhere. And it was so enlightening. Like, I'm fortunate that I have a really good credit score, but I wouldn't have thought some of the breakdowns and the percentages were even factored in. Do you want to just touch on that for a moment?
Yeah, I actually hate credit scores. I think that they're very challenging as like a systemic thing. And I'll give you a couple of examples as to why. But first, a credit score kind of is determined by a number of different factors. And things like your credit history or new inquiries on your credit score, all of those different types of things, payment history, credit utilization, those things go into creating a credit score, and they're weighted based off of kind of a system that was created, and they determined that certain things had certain values, and that is kind of ultimately how your credit score is created. So it's not just paying off your credit card on a timely basis, though that is really, really important. But I'll give you a little example as to why I'm really not a fan of credit scores. And one is, I don't think, and I'll caveat this with, depending on where you live, you might need a credit score to get a rental, like a home rental. But ultimately, I think people worry about their credit score when they don't necessarily need to. And ultimately, you really only need to be focused on your credit score if you're going to be taking out more debt in the near future. So if you're going to be qualifying for a mortgage, or you want to open another credit card, or whatever it is, get an auto loan, I think those are the time periods that, yes, you do need to worry about your credit score, but kind of just on the day-to-day, there's not really a need to focus on that. And one of the challenges with the credit score is around that credit utilization. So we know that the wage gap is real. Women are paid less. White women, 89 cents on the dollar here in Canada. I think it's 84 in the US. And then women of color is sitting at around 62 cents. So we know our wages are kind of lower already. So when we go to apply for a credit card, let's say, what ends up happening is they look at how much income you have and kind of base your credit off of that, along with a number of other factors. And what might happen is I might qualify for $5,000 of credit on a credit card, and a man in a similar maybe role as me, but who is making more money due to, let's say, the wage gap in this case, he might get approved for $10,000. And so let's say we both go out and buy something that's $3,000. So maybe I don't know how much TVs cost. We'll go with the TV. So that man now has a credit utilization of 30%, whereas I am sitting at a credit utilization of 60%. Now, most times you want to keep your credit utilization under 30%. That's kind of good for your credit score. But we're both buying the same thing, and this is ultimately going to impact my credit score negatively because I'm utilizing more of my available credit compared to the man. And so if we kind of fast forward, what this actually does is, let's say we both walk into the bank and look to get a mortgage. They're going to look at our credit scores and say, hey, he has a better credit score than she does. We're going to give him a lower interest rate. So now it's, we've seen it work through. Right? Exactly. Yeah. We're making less money and we're paying more in interest just because we both bought the same TV on a credit card where we had different approval limits. And so that's one of the reasons I have such a challenging relationship with credit scores.
Okay. Well, it's not good. That's like so enraging.
I know.
Not that surprising. So another great point that you have is, ask for the raise. And the example that you give is, even if you're making only like it really depends on the industry and everything, how much only would be. But asking for a $5,000 raise in your annual would result in, $750,000 over your lifetime.
Yeah.
And just the dynamic of how we're not, again, it goes back to conditioning and education, like being the nice girl, not pushing. And what are some tips that you give women in terms of just asking for the raise?
Yeah, I think you have to go in prepared. So doing your research is number one. So looking to websites like Glassdoor, or if you're a freelancer, there's lots of different websites that you can find that information on. So doing market research for comparable roles, but also I think asking former colleagues or current colleagues, and you can do this in a variety of different ways instead of just being like, hey, how much do you make? You might offer what you make first, or you might say like, hey, I'm looking at this new role. What do you think my expectation should be around salary range? And if they've held that position before, they can usually give you that range. And I think talking to men in those roles is really important too. And I share a story in the book where I found out I was making $13,000 less than the guy I was training. So those conversations are so important. But then I think, oh, I know, I'm over it now. But at the time, oh man, I was mad. But I think the other piece of it too is being able to show kind of the receipts of why you deserve to be paid more. And I love the idea of what we call a hype folder. So anytime someone at work gives you positive reinforcement or you get a compliment around some of the work you're doing, screenshot it, put it in a folder on your desktop or on your phone. And those ultimately become your receipts around your accomplishments when you're going in to negotiate for that raise. And then I think kind of lastly, try to come at it from a collaborative approach. So it doesn't necessarily, you don't walk in and demand, $10,000 more. That usually doesn't work for women for a whole host of reasons. But I think like looking at it and coming at it from a way of open-ended questions is really important. So like, how can we make it so that I feel valued for my work here, but is still sustainable to your budget? I think, questions like that can be great ways to open the conversation and start to have that conversation around getting to that sustainable number for kind of both parties.
I like that framing of sustainability and like asking about the budget versus asking specifically for a raise.
Because the other thing too is like it's expensive to replace an employee, right? You have to go out and post the role. You might be hiring a recruiter, you're going through interviews, then you have to train the person. Like it's tens of thousands of dollars to hire someone new. So keep that in mind too when you're asking is to replace you if you left, it would cost the company quite a bit of money. So it is in their best interest to keep you at the organization.
Yeah. Okay. And the hype folder. That's brilliant because I think particularly as women, you think you're going to remember the compliments.
No,
you don't. You remember all of the negative criticism.
Mm-hmm. And when you're having a bad day, and we all have them, I mean, especially as an entrepreneur, I feel like I'm on an emotional roller coaster every single day. Sometimes you just go into that hype folder and you're like, okay, like this is a reminder as to like why I'm doing what I'm doing, or, this person saw value for my work, or I changed this person's life, or whatever. I think, in addition to being great for negotiating raises or, rates when it comes to contractors, I think, it's a good reminder to us that we're doing good work.
Yeah, so important. So let's go a little bit to your work. Like you're all in many multiple ways besides the book, helping women. Is it like bridging really the education gap first? And because if you can't change what you don't know, which is
totally. And we really aren't taught it, which drives me completely wild. And I've been trying to get into some of the schools here. Very, very challenging. But, I even notice the difference between men and women's interest in money in high school. So I've gone to a couple private schools. It's much easier to kind of work with them as opposed to kind of like the public school system, which is, a lot of red tape. But this one private school, they have an option. They bring in speakers and you can choose kind of what section you want to go to. And I was talking to the woman who was running the HR section. And we both had about 13 students in our class, probably grades 8 to 12. And I had one girl in my class. And I was teaching obviously personal finance, and she had one boy in her class and she was teaching HR. And I was like, oh my God, it's already happening. And then they're in like junior high and high school. So I think we're very much conditioned to believe that, men are more apt to do math and science. I think oftentimes it's like cute to be bad at math. Oh, I'm just bad at math. And I don't love that. We have calculators. You don't need to do math in your head. We have calculators, we have Excel, we have all the tools. But I would love to see kind of that change as well.
Another specific that I wanted to drill down on, because I think it's super tangible, it's that women can change immediately, is the amount of cash that women tend to hold in their checking account versus some savings account or investing it. And I thought that was really brilliant. And I think it's so important.
Yeah, investing to me is like one of the biggest ways individually we can close the wealth gap. So in the book, I talk about things we can do individually, things we can do as like employees of companies, and things we can do as like global citizens. And the last two, both companies and globally, take a long time and take a lot of advocacy work and a lot of policy change, and we know that. But individually, you absolutely can make change much faster than that. I mean, we're filming this on a day that's really interesting. The stock market is bleeding right now due to kind of the tariffs being implemented. I'm not sure when this will come out, so who knows? Maybe the stock market will have corrected by then. But
We'll see.
I am not holding my breath. But investing for the long term is how we close the wealth gap, is how we gain that wealth that allows us to reach financial freedom. When we look at the difference between keeping money in a savings account and money invested in the stock market, it's a difference of millions of dollars. And to me, like when I first learned all of this, I was like 19 and understanding compound interest. It was like, I now don't have to earn that $1 million. Like I can use that money for fun, or I can stop working, or whatever it is. Because $1 million over the course of your life, being able to put $1 million away is a lot of money, right? Like we're not taking $100,000 salary and putting all of that in savings every year. We have other expenses. And so being able to have your money work for you is kind of like, I don't want to say it's a hack, but it is the best way to build wealth. And I think so many people are scared of the stock market. I can see why when days like today happen, but I think coming back to the point we were talking about a little bit earlier, it comes down to a lack of education. We're told that like only rich people can invest in the stock market, or you need a lot of money to invest in the stock market, or you need someone to do it for you, or it's really expensive. And none of those things are true. I think that and maybe they were true at one point, but they're definitely not true now. And so to kind of bust those myths and educate women to get their money in the stock market in a way that is, risk aware, we're not trading penny stocks here, I think is really powerful.
Yeah. I mean, finding a way that, and I mean, I'm investing, I won't get into my story exactly, but for myriad of reasons, I was starting at 18 and I learned a lot of important things like look at this in 7 and 10 year, plan it. You can chunk up what percentage of your portfolio you're doing high risk, low risk. Like there's all these strategies
Totally.
to get more digestible when you're new. And I mean, I think hiring someone isn't a horrible idea if you know nothing. But one thing, I was at an event at the 51 the other day, and they've got these new cards that are,
I love the 51. Big fan.
Cards. So like
those are so cute.
What financial advice would you give your younger self? It all comes down to this reality that like there's all these spaces, the locker room, that men just talk about their portfolios. Like it's a conversation that's had. And as a woman, you really have to think like there's probably certain friend groups that you would just never talk about your finances. And finding a group of women that you can feel that talking about money isn't taboo, I think really helps the whole process and getting.
Absolutely. I've worked in many male dominated industries. I was at a big 4 firm, and then I was in the tech space, and I would, come back from lunch and hear a bunch of guys in the corner talking about, the angel investment they just made in some tech company, and whether or not that tech company worked out, it was just such an interesting dynamic to watch, because I would see these guys saying, oh, I put $5,000 into this, blah, blah, blah. And I just never saw those conversations happening with women.
Yeah. Something that's, I mean, I've gone and educated myself, taken courses, the Feminist Lab through Haskane and the Movement 51, and Spring also out of Vancouver offers a lot of courses. I think that's what your academy does on some level too. We'll get to that.
We're kind of before the angel investing stage.
So in terms of angel investing, I think for me, what made it is finding angel groups run by women. So you already feel like not so fish out of water. And my experience so far has just been like there's a real range in knowledge and experience, and also like a complete welcoming of like, yeah, come to the table, little by little, invest at a low level until you're more comfortable, and it's just like anything else. It's a learning curve.
And I think, to the point we were talking at the beginning about women having more wealth, I think ultimately what that does is it allows us to invest in things we care about and make an impact in our communities. And that can look like so many different things, right? That can look like being able to provide generational wealth for your family. That can look like starting a scholarship. That can look like investing in other women-owned businesses that don't necessarily get the same level of funding as male-run businesses. I think we get the opportunity to define what that impact looks like once we've built the wealth, which is, one of the reasons I am so passionate about this work, but also love the work that organizations like Spring and the 51 are doing.
Yes. So I'd love if you could touch on, because not only are female founders usually better and they run leaner companies and they're more profitable in the long run, similar for investing, like there's all these stereotypes that women don't know anything about money, but we're actually better at investing largely because we're not so reactionary.
We're not emotional.
Ironically, we're not
very ironically. So there was actually a study called Boys Will Be Boys. And like, of course it was named that. But it shows that women outperform their male counterparts when it comes to investing by, I think it's 0.4%, which doesn't sound like a lot until it's compounded over a long period of time. And you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I think women are definitely, I like to say they're risk aware, not risk averse. I find women need to educate themselves maybe more than their male counterparts to actually understand what's going on, which isn't a bad thing. And, there was another study done where there was a financial literacy test, and I think there were 7 questions. When women were given the option to choose, I don't know, they chose that option most often. When that option was taken away, more often than not, they answered the question correctly. So I think that also shows there's a bit of a confidence gap. We do know what we're talking about, just because we don't maybe 100% know how to explain it, or, some dude has, said, oh, no, that's not right, without, ever being able to back it up, or someone's mansplained you, or whatever it is. That doesn't mean you don't know what you're talking about. So I think a good reminder that we oftentimes know more than we think or give ourselves credit for.
Yes. So tell us more about the work that you're doing and the academy and what that looks like.
Yeah. So the Wealth Building Academy is my company, and really it kind of started out of the pandemic. I was kind of doing speaking engagements and workshops off the side of my desk kind of while I was in the corporate space. And then obviously the pandemic hit and we couldn't meet in person, which was very sad for me because I'm an extrovert. But this kind of spurred, I guess, the desire to build a business that was sustainable online. And that's where the Wealth Building Academy was born. So we educate women to invest and build their wealth. And we do that through kind of a number of different mechanisms. The first being we have an online course that is kind of go at your own pace, asynchronous, that teaches women how to invest in the stock market. So everything from what is a stock, what is a bond, what is a TFSA, what is an RRSP, all the way through to executing a trade to build a multi-6, if not 7-figure portfolio that's going to sustain you into your retirement. And that course has monthly office hours. We have an online community, and that kind of is available for women. I also run a few small group masterminds throughout the year that are kind of for women that maybe know or have the basics down when it comes to investing, but want to design a life that's everything we talked about here today, right? Having an impact with our wealth, growing our wealth to the point where we are able to make decisions that impact generations. And so that's kind of from the perspective of more of a holistic financial, I would say, roadmap over the course of, I have a 6-week program and a 6-month program. So those are kind of the main areas where I'm educating women, in addition to the speaking engagements that I love and get to do.
Incredible. And of course, start here.
And the pink tax. Yeah, that too. I also wrote a book in the middle of the pandemic while I was 8 months pregnant. So
amazing. Congratulations on the success of the book. And did I read that you have another book? And I'm not sure if that was before or after.
No, I do not. I'm doing my master's right now. I'm about 5 classes away from being done. And once that's done, I think maybe there'll be another book. But I need to finish those papers.
One thing at a time.
Yeah.
Well, we'll share all those links in the show notes. Any sort of closing thoughts you want to leave us with?
I think it's an extremely uncertain time right now. And I know we're all ready for some certain times, because I feel like it's been very uncertain since, honestly, the beginning of 2020. But I will say, when we zoom out and when we actually look at kind of the decades of our lives, the stock market and money has been a consistent thing since the 1800s, right? Since the stock market has been around. And the general trend of the stock market is up. The average return of the stock market every year is 10%. And of course, there are going to be years, and maybe 2025 will be one of them. I can't see into the future, but it might be a down year. That doesn't mean you don't invest, and that doesn't mean you don't get started. There is that, I think it's a Chinese proverb that says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So we can't harp on what we didn't do. We have to focus on what we can do moving forward. And I think education is always where I start. So if you're someone who isn't sure of how to get started, one of the simplest things you can do is borrow a book from the library, or go follow some personal finance creators on Instagram. Surround yourself by the people and the content that you consume that is kind of a little bit more financial in nature. And then, once you've started to educate yourself, you can kind of then start to dip your toes in and understand kind of what next steps you need to do. And I can share a link to this if you're interested, but I have a 25-step checklist that, outlines areas that people can, either check off if they've done, or what next step they might want to take. Because I think sometimes that's the overwhelming piece, is there's so much we need to do. It can be overwhelming to choose that next step. And so, as simple as it sounds, I always say to my students and my mastermind clients, like, just pick the one next thing. Because in 12 months, again, as simple as it sounds, you'll have done 12 things. And so this checklist is a really great resource for understanding, what you've done and what your next step might actually be. So get started is, I guess, ultimately the takeaway that I would have for people, because we can't change what's happened in the past. We can only kind of move forward and move towards that financial freedom goal.
Yes. Love that. Start small, start today, start sooner rather than later. And yeah, just the power of the compound effect. So that's why
absolutely.
You do something sooner rather than later, and the payoff will be in the long term.
Yes. And that's the thing, when the stock market is doing this and you're stressed out, it's okay to not look. It's okay to zoom out. It's okay to, you can't see the forest from the trees. You have to look at like the 10-year return, and you have to zoom out and say, like, this is just a blip. Go look at the 2020 crash in March of 2020. By August, it had rebounded. So I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen. I can't see into the future. I'd be very, very rich if I could. And I'd be probably on some island somewhere. But the thing is, like, to just not participate in the system ultimately means that you're going to have to work harder and save more money to sustain yourself in retirement. And I don't think any of us want that. We want our money to work for us, and we want to be able to get to financial freedom faster.
Let's end. What was the Gloria Steinem quote that you had on power?
Yes. That's the first quote in the book. And it's one of my favorite quotes. The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off.
Yes. All right. Let's leave on that somewhat empowering note, but start today, and we'll add that link in the show notes. So
Sure.
Once that checklist, you can start there. And again, I highly recommend the book. It's something that you will read and reread. It's really like a guide. And yeah, thank you so much for your energy and time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Wellness is a Way of Life. Are you ready to make wellness a natural part of your routine? Let's stay connected. Go to meganswanwellness.com. Until next time, live well and thrive.